Mr. Ryder, it's great to have you here in Indonesia. Tell us a little bit about your visit to Indonesia, the purpose, and who have you met, and what have you discussed, and your main points of interest.
Well, I've been here this is my third day in Indonesia, and for most of the time up until now we've been in Jakarta. We've met with the government authorities, had some extensive meetings with the Minister of Manpower. I was received by the Vice President of the country yesterday. Also conversations with the employer community and with the trade unions. And really my first objective is to get a feeling, a first-hand feeling for developments, the challenges in the world of work here in Indonesia. And it's quite interesting. The first time I came here was 20 years ago. So I've been able to... A lot has changed. And I've been able to measure, I think, the extent of change, which is very significant and very positive, but also to identify the challenges that lie ahead, and they're considerable as well. And from here, well, a workplace visit, which is great, and we're going on to Kupang to look at the rural sector tomorrow. Okay. So I'm really very happy to be back and learning a lot.
Okay, so a little bit more of your impressions on how Indonesia has progressed in the last 20 years since your visit, and what are the main issues being discussed and the priorities that you think Indonesia should be focused on when it comes to
Well, I think you can measure the progress along sort of two axes. The first one is democracy and rights. I think Indonesia has come a very long way. 20 years ago the situation was a little bit different. But that said, I think what is really spectacular has been the extent of economic growth. Indonesia, with all of the ups and the downs and the bumps in the road, has grown quickly, and I think Indonesians have felt the benefits of that fast growth. And you're still at 5 or 6%. That's pretty good. Not too bad.
Especially considering the global financial
in
economic
other places. Absolutely.
Situation.
So good progress. But what are the challenges ahead? Well, one thing about Indonesia is it's a young and growing population. So the economy has to keep growing so that young people coming onto the labour market can find a job. Indonesia has to create 2 million new jobs every year. There are 2 million new people coming on the labour market. So job creation is continually, I think, a challenge. At the same time, it's not a luxury. Indonesia has to look at the quality of the jobs. In the ILO, we talk about decent work, and Indonesians want and need decent work. And there are some challenges there. I mean, that's why visiting this garment factory is so interesting. The garment industry is a very important part of Indonesia's development project. And it's important that the people who come and work in this garment factory have good conditions, have good pay, have the right to be heard, have the right to organise. And we're working with our Indonesian partners to ensure that is the case. If I could identify one more challenge, which I think is really essential, it's about skills. It's about skills and training. You've got a big challenge ahead of you in Indonesia, which is the ASEAN Economic Community as of next year. I think if Indonesia is really going to get the maximum benefits from that community, you need the skilled workforce, you need the educated workforce that will be able to compete in the economy of the future. More and more the economy of the future is about knowledge, is about skills. So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that Indonesia
especially
has
if we
ahead.
want to be competitive and take advantage of the ASEAN Economic Community, where there will be more sort of job opportunities.
There will be indeed, but I think all of the studies that have been done show that the new opportunities will be for higher skilled workers. Now, Indonesia can go one of two ways. You can be successful through higher skills, higher productivity, and therefore higher wages, or you can try and compete on being cheap, having low wages. I think that's a dead end. I think that would be the wrong way to go.
Yeah, creating value is therefore
moving up
important.
that value chain.
Okay,
yes.
Just a couple of issues that you mentioned. Well, first of all, what do you think of? What's your impression of the garment factory that you just visited? Is this a reflection of how things should work, how employee?
I must say, I think it's a pretty good example of how things can work. You've got here a very significant number of working people. I can imagine how important this factory is for the community in which it's located. These are probably jobs that matter a great deal. So the fact that this company is successful, is growing, is already very important. What I think also is important, and with the ILO we are cooperating on this with our Better Work programme, is the rights of workers are respected here, working conditions are satisfactory. We just taken a look around. Pay and other conditions are decided by negotiations. I just met with the union representatives. They said, well, yeah, the negotiations were tough. We had to argue about the money, but it's okay. It's okay. We get our voice heard and we get a deal. So to answer your question, I think this is really what the garment industry should look like, how the garment industry should operate. And I think it's very important that we recognize that this is an international industry, very, very tough competition.
Especially this is for export products.
Absolutely. International in two senses, that what is made here goes to other countries, it's mostly exported. And those buyers in Europe and in America are tough people. They want good quality goods and they want it cheap. So the pressures on the producers are big. But international is industry as well because it's very mobile. They can pick up and go to another country very quickly.
Yes, they're going to say, okay, this is too expensive, the cost or the quality is not that good, we just pick another country.
And in garments it's really easy because the capital is mobile, startup costs are actually quite low, so they can pick up and go. But what I think is important is that these companies make a commitment to the people, to the communities, to the economy in which they operate, and are successful, because I think one of the first things you expect from a company is it's successful. It's no good if a company goes broke. You have no jobs, no income at that point.
Yeah. Decent work. Just a quick definition of what does decent work means, and how to actually align the perception from the employer side as well as the employee side, and what decent work actually means.
Decent work means having a job which gives you a decent income, which means that you can feed yourself and your family and provide for your family in conditions that you and me would think is acceptable. That's the first thing. Secondly, it is respect for the workers' rights, so the right to organise, to bargain, to be safe from discrimination, also to make sure there is no forced labour, there is no child labour. These are things that matter, So rights as well. Thirdly, social protection. It's really important that workers have health care, have pension coverage. Unfortunately, 70% of workers in the world do not have even minimum social protection. I see in this factory there is a health insurance scheme. I see the clinic. So there are basics of social protection in place. And the last pillar of decent work is what we call social dialogue. That is to say, when there are problems, when there are issues to be resolved, people sit down and they talk about them. It's not just a matter of somebody deciding it's going to be like that. So I think those pillars of decent work are the definition, and I think they're also present in the factory we're visiting today. So that's encouraging.
And there's the tripartite, there's a three-element. When it comes to dialogue, you have the employers and you have the employees, and then you have like a third party. In this instance, maybe the...
Well, the tripartite, as we call it in the ILO, is the three parts of governments, then employers and workers. In Jakarta yesterday, I was privileged to take part in a meeting of the tripartite National Labour Committee. So you have the Minister of Manpower chairing the meeting, you have the workers over there, you have the employers over there, and they talk and they work out some of the problems that are there, they discuss the problems that you have. The ILO works on that tripartite basis. We bring together governments, employers and workers to work out the problems of the world of work.
Now, ideally, dialogue and collaboration is the best way of resolving differences and disputes. Now, the last, you're probably aware, the last few days, and recently especially with the hiking of the fuel price or the reducing of the subsidies, we've seen lots of demonstrations by workers. Are demonstrations, in your experience, especially within your background as from a trade union, are demonstrations an effective way, or is it a desirable way of resolving disputes? And
well, I saw the demonstrations when I arrived in Jakarta. I watched them going down the street. I must say I thought they were very impressive because they were orderly, the police was very relaxed. It was done, I think, in a very creditable way for Indonesia. But to answer your question, look, the right to demonstrate, the right to strike eventually, these are fundamental rights. So there is nothing inherently bad or wrong about a demonstration. People have the right to do it. But you're quite right, it's not the way you want to do your business every day. It is much preferable that you are able to find solutions to problems through negotiation, through consultations, with the option of a demonstration or a strike. It's there as an ultimate recourse. It's when things cannot be solved otherwise. But certainly it shouldn't be every day. It shouldn't be the regular mode of doing business. So I think we have to balance those things up. And I think Indonesia would be well advised to develop its what we call labour market institutions, its mechanisms of dialogue, its mechanisms for resolving problems in this everyday routine in a meeting room rather than in the street sort of a way.
Normally when workers demand, it's higher pay, higher wage, or fair wage, and so on and so on. And that is often not, in the same way that, say, employers see what is a proper wage and so on and so forth. What is the sort of the sweet spot? Again, this is where the employers are happy that they're paying a good wage, and then the employees are happy for getting a good wage. And what's in your experience is the formula? Well,
obviously, nobody should be surprised if the workers think the wages should be a bit higher and employers think they should be a bit lower. I mean, there's no surprise in that. That's the world. That's how it is. But where is that sweet spot? Where is the sort of the natural centre of gravity? Well, I think there's a straightforward answer to that. In the end, wages can only go up in line with productivity. You cannot receive more if you don't make more. In the longer term, you can always get a short-term win, or you can lose something in the short term. But in the longer term, it's productivity that governs the behaviour of real wages. And again, that's why I come back to the importance of education, of skills, because that's how productivity will increase, and that, in the end, is how real wages are going to go up. So that is the secret, that is the trick, to make sure that you're able to link wage increases with productivity increases. It means companies can be successful, and it means that workers can get their share of the benefits of the success.
There's no point increasing the wage and then the factory goes bankrupt because nobody can afford it.
And it just won't work.
Okay, but Mr. Ryder, what's the ILO's role when it comes to this situation? I mean, do you take sides? I mean, I know you're from the trade union background.
We are strictly not taking sides. It's important. We have a multiple role. In Indonesia, we have a series of programs and projects amounting to $20 million. We have a portfolio of activities, very varied, from microcredit to the rural sector, sustainability in the rural sector, to this Better Work project here at this garment factory. But I see our role really in three areas: giving policy advice to the government. The government is looking for solutions to problems that many countries face, but we can give advice, and particularly we can share knowledge. The ILO has 185 member countries. Many of them have tackled the same problems or similar problems. We can bring that experience to Indonesia. Indonesia can learn from it, and by the way, we can learn from Indonesia as well. And another role which I think is extremely important is capacity building. That is to make trade unions, employers, and indeed the government more knowledgeable about the problems they have to deal with and increase their capacity to find the right solutions. So that's the in-country role. I want to just say as well, Indonesia has become an international player. Last month, I met the President of Indonesia at the G20 Leaders Summit in Brisbane in Australia. And this is another area. We are working internationally to put this decent work objective at the top of the international policy agenda. The very first sentence of the G20 Leaders Communique, it's 5 pages long, but the first sentence says, our highest priority is to promote economic growth, to provide quality jobs for our people. So I think our message is getting through.
Yeah, and also in Indonesia we have what we call a demographic bonus, although it's not going to be a bonus if the workers are not productive, they're not competitive. And the other thing is poverty is still very much a problem here in Indonesia. Over 60% of our workers are in the informal sector. And the other thing is migrant workers. I mean, migrant workers are something that, ideally we want to send more high-skilled workers because they're exposed and vulnerable to all sorts of abuses. And child trafficking. I mean, these are issues that Indonesia faces. How do you see Indonesia tackling with these?
Well, we've talked a lot in these last 3 days about these issues. I would say at the darkest end of the labour market, where abuse, I'm afraid, still occurs. On the question of migration, this is a matter we've discussed with the Minister of Manpower, also with the Vice President. Indonesia is quite right. to say that we are not happy, we are not content with the conditions and treatment that so many Indonesian people get when they go to work in other countries. And of course, the focus is very much on women, low-skilled women, who particularly go to work as domestic employees, particularly in the Gulf region. And there is a massive problem. There is no doubt there is a massive problem. The ILO has made fair migration systems one of our priorities for the future, because we recognize that there are 231 million migrant workers in the world today. Unfortunately, many of them are subject to really very bad treatment. Now, we have to work at this. We have to get the destination countries to accept that they have responsibilities. We have a saying in the ILO that labor is not a commodity. So you don't send an Indonesian worker like an export of a shirt made in this factory. These are people with rights, these are human beings, and they need their rights to be respected, and they need their humanity also to be recognized. So I said very clearly to the Vice President yesterday, I want to work with Indonesia as a partner to make migration fair, to make it humane. Indonesia, of course, is thinking about stopping migration in certain areas, or has done so. Now, I can understand why they would wish to do that. Where the intolerable is the normal, you stop it. On the other hand, migration can be a very positive thing. I think in the long term, the right thing is to actually make migration acceptable, to make it fair, because it does bring benefits to both the sending and the receiving countries. On child labour, which is the other issue you have mentioned, I'm really very encouraged, and I congratulated the government on the fact that they have adopted this roadmap for Indonesia, which has as an objective, or the objective, to eliminate all child labour by 2022. Indonesia has been successful. Indonesia, over the last 20 years, has brought down its child labour nearly by 1/2. So it can be done. This is not something which is inevitable. It's not something which is just a normal part of life. You can bring it down if you bring the political will and the right policies to the job. And I really think that Indonesia, I was actually at a world conference against child labour last year in Brazil, and I was able to quote Indonesia as being one of the positive stories, one of the countries which has taken on the challenge of child labour and succeeded, or at least on the road to succeeding in its elimination.
So you're quite positive about Indonesia being on the right track with a new government and there. But we have signed a lot of these, ratified a lot of the conventions.
Yes.
But what are the things that we still need to comply on? Because obviously we have to bring ourselves to a much more international standard. And is there constant audit on how Indonesia is doing and complying to all these international conventions?
Indonesia stands out because it was the first country in this region of the Asian Pacific to ratify all of the 8 ILO conventions on fundamental rights. It's a package of conventions which define rights at work. Indonesia ratified all of these in 1998. It was the first country to do so. Now, ratification is one thing, implementation is a bit more tricky, but Indonesia has made big progress. I've given you the example of child labour. There's still a trafficking forced labour problem, that's right. But, I think the real challenges for Indonesia in the future are to build its labour institutions, stronger labour inspection, stronger mechanisms for dialogue, better skills and training capacities. All of these things matter a lot. And you mentioned one other thing which I think is important, which is informality. I think you have to get your workers out of the informal economy. Actually, it's down to 53%. Already come down a bit, but it's still half, more than half, isn't it? But that has to happen. Because
that's where the social protection bit is.
That social protection comes in, it's where the manufacturing sector comes in, and it's where productivity comes in as well. So I think this is really a very big challenge, and frankly, I think with ASEAN next year, these challenges will be right in front of the nose of policymakers in Indonesia, and I hope the ILO will be able to help Indonesia confront those very, very pressing challenges.
Well, I hope so too. Otherwise, we would end up with the low skills, low paying jobs, and everybody else will benefit from the big market.
That's what you mustn't do.
Indonesia is now. Let's the global perspective, because the world has changed, and we have this globalization and huge migrations. People crossing borders and with new global problems, and of course the other thing is the global economic and financial problems. We are still facing that. How optimistic are you in the years ahead? You know, ideally there should be zero employment everywhere, but obviously that's not the case.
No, we're a long way from that.
Yeah.
Look, I think the reality is that labour market conditions are very tough in much of the world. This extraordinary financial crisis hit us in 2007. We talk now about recovery. Policymakers tend to talk about recovery. Well, labour hasn't recovered. The labour market has not recovered. You know, there are over 200 million people out of work at the moment, unevenly distributed. But the global economy is not growing quickly enough to get people back to work. It's not growing quickly enough to bring down unemployment. And I think we have to be particularly concerned about young people. If you're under 25 years old, you're 3 times more likely to be unemployed than other adult workers. So this is not going so well.
And there's a potential for problems, you know, when young people are unemployed.
You know, I live in Europe. There are countries in Europe where unemployment is over 60% for young people. Greece, Spain. I mean, these are social crises and recognized as such. So this is a top priority. At the same time, I think, you know, we have to look at wages. Why do people work? They work to get paid, to make a better life. And we just published our wages report in the world, very interesting. In this region, Asia Pacific, wages are going quickly. Last year they grew by nearly 6%, which is pretty good, real wages. In the developed world, the industrialized world, they're stagnant. Real wages are stuck, they're not growing at all. Which in some ways it's good news for the emerging countries because you're closing the gap in wages between the so-called rich world and the developing world. So the world economy is growing at different speeds. There are different sort of parts of the world growing in very different ways. And that means the world economy is not only got problems of growth, but the different pieces of the global economy are interacting in different ways. The big success story is Asia Pacific. That's a big success story, but you have big problems, you have big challenges ahead as well. And that has to do with developing social protection, it has to do with getting the informal economy down, and it has to do with protecting people's rights as well.
And if the developed countries are not, you know, they're not going to be good customers anymore. Well, they stop buying from us.
Look at this factory that we're sitting outside. I was asking the chief executive officer, well, where do you send your goods? Europe and the United States. And as you say, if those economies are not growing, those markets are going to shrink. And so Indonesia and other countries should not rely exclusively on exports. You should also develop your own internal markets as well. Indonesia is doing that.
Yes.
That's also a reason why wages growing is good for the economy, because people can buy the goods here in Indonesia. You don't have to send it to the United States.
We have a huge domestic market there.
Big country with a massive market.
But one thing I notice, and I think it also applies to every country, including the United States, it's the income gap between the inequality between the rich and the poor. I mean, you know, they have the 1% versus the 99%, or the 0.1% versus, you know, the 99.9%. I mean, is this something which can be a potential time bomb, because the difference in income
absolutely. I would say the two real big risk factors in the world of work today: youth unemployment, about which we spoke already, but growing inequality. Absolutely. And by the way, in all surveys done, including of business, they say the one thing that we are most worried about is the growth of inequality in our societies, which starts in the world of work. It starts because wages are not growing, people are not getting better off. And in the end, as you said, this is going to give us a problem. People recognize already that growing inequality actually puts a brake on economic growth because people are not buying goods. It's a waste of talent because inequality stops social mobility. In an unequal society, people born at the bottom stay at the bottom, even if they're very talented. So this is a waste of talent as well. So we really do need to address these issues of inequality. Unfortunately, at the moment, the trend is in the wrong direction. Inequality is continuing to go up not to come down. And I think we have to reverse that.
And I hear, especially in the United States, supposedly a democratic country, equal opportunity. The difference between, the ordinary wage earner and the really top, it can be like 300-400 times.
Absolutely, and it's multiplied in recent times. And it really is a dramatic thing. And people worry about it, and they sort of feel bad about it, but they don't act on it. And I think that's where issues like minimum wages, collective bargaining, those are the issues that matter. And skills, by the way, because that's a way to move up the ladder as well. So all the things we've been talking about are ways of combating this dramatic problem of inequality in the world.
Okay, finally, ILO's work 3, 5, 10 years ahead. What are your big main priorities?
Well, strangely enough, the ILO, we're the oldest organisation in the international system. In 5 years' time, we're going to be 100 years old. Big birthday. One thing I've launched for our 100th birthday is a worldwide reflection, thought process, study on the future of work. All of the time, you, me, we worry about the problems that are right in front of our noses, the problems we must solve today and tomorrow. I think it's really important we look 5 years, we look to the horizon, as we say. Look 5 years down the road. What's going to happen to us? Is technology going to create jobs, or is it going to destroy jobs? Is growing inequality going to really destroy something very important in our society, our cohesion? What about the green economy? There are negotiations taking place today in Peru on climate change. If we're going to stop climate change, we have to change the way we work. We have to stop creating so many carbon emissions. So the future of the green economy, how do we get to this sustainable future? What are we going to do about world poverty? The UN is trying to eliminate global poverty by 2030. How does work fit in? So I want, in 5 years' time, looking ahead, for the ILO to have a really clear idea about what our world of work will look like in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time. The world of work for our kids and our grandkids, and what we should be doing about it. Not just as an intellectual curiosity exercise, but as a way of determining the policies that we have to put in place, the things we have to do.
But as an organisation, do you think that ILO is an effective organisation?
Listen, I do. We are an organisation which, as I've said, bring together governments, employers and workers. Our mandate is to promote social justice in the world, to make sure that our societies are fair. I think people care about that. I think young people who are more and more cynical about politicians, about political parties, they care about fairness. So I think our mandate is really, really relevant to the world we live in today and the world we have to create in the future. So we have the right mandate, but we have to work very, very hard, like everybody else, to make sure that we do our job well. And we're determined to do that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for talking with us. And good luck, and we hope to see you again in Indonesia.
I look forward to coming back.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.